Well, hello and good afternoon, everyone. So great of you all to be here. My name is Rhett Buttle. I am so privileged and thrilled to be able to lead the economic content for the Aspen Ideas Festival. I hope you all are having an amazing time. Today's conversation is one of the ones that I am most interested in, so I'm going to be sitting in the audience with all of you. But first, I just wanted to do a quick activity, which is I would love to get a raise of hands. As you all saw, we have a very intriguing title, is Capitalism in Crisis. So please raise your hand if you think capitalism is in crisis. Wow, that's a lot of folks. All right, drop your hands. For those of you who don't think capitalism is in crisis, please raise your hands. Awesome. Well, we have an amazing panel of experts, amazing group of folks who I've had the privilege of working with for years who are going to help us decode some of this. But my big pleasure is to be able to hand the mic over to a dear friend and colleague and a mentor, Ida Rademacher, who leads economic programming at the Aspen Institute. Ida, over to you.
Thanks, Rhett. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. What a great room for a conversation that we've had a lot of iterations of every year at the Ideas Festival. So much so that I think, as some of you have heard, we're actually going to create an entire new annex of the Ideas Festival theme and have an Aspen Ideas economy for the first time this fall. I call it the concept car year, so stay tuned for more information there. But that's mainly because we anticipated, one, that there was a highly polarized sense in the room of whether there is a crisis or not, and even if we're all having the same conversation. And two, because once we do get into that with the panel today, we think there's a lot more to say than we'll be able to do in 50 minutes. I'm just going to put a little bit of context on this and then really turn it over, and our goal is to have a conversation among ourselves that you really are going to wish that we could do more of, but also that we might even forget you're in the room for a few minutes as we get passionately into it together. We're going to give each of you the opportunity to answer that question for yourselves and say a little bit about why. But I would say that the feedback from kind of a 360 of the different things that are being written, the different conversations that are being had, is that there is a sense that the divisions that happen in terms of who is benefiting from a market economy, from the form of capitalism that we have here, has got to some level of tipping points of systemic risk in terms of a sense of hopelessness about generational mobility, some of the levels of economic insecurity, some of the ways that people are losing trust in the corporation, some of the externalities of both climate and societal things that we just can't quite price risk for. So there's a lot of things that are potentially wrong. The question is, are they fixable? Can we evolve it in a way, or do we have to start over with some questions? And so I just think to really kind of grapple with some of the fundamentals here, I'm excited to have three really different kinds of perspectives. Just directly to my left is Josh Bolton. And in addition to now leading the Business Roundtable, which I think many of you, most of you are familiar with, has had a lot of different roles in the administration over the years, and you've sat in a lot of different seats to have a good perspective on this. Thanks for joining us, Josh. To Josh's left is Jillian Tett. She is not only on the editorial board of the Financial Times, she's a provost at Cambridge, and remind me, I'm forgetting why am I blanking on your school?
King's College. And
King's
I'm
College.
not provost in American English,
so
I'm not in charge of the academic curriculum, and I'm not provost in English, which sounds like a priest. I'm sort of more like president is a way to explain it, yeah.
Well, you can just take the title.
Or head.
However you want. I like the piece of that. Jillian, we'll hear from you. And Jillian, I think, and I, you guys might be sitting in the first ever Aspen Ideas Festival panel with not one, but two cultural and economic anthropologists sitting here talking about capitalism. So a lot of fun there. And Jen Sorensen, to Jillian's left, is an impact investor and entrepreneur who we've had a lot of privilege of working with. Also, as we were at SoCap last year, saw a lot of the ways that you think about the roles of capital in addressing the problems of capitalism. So this is not just about corporations, this is also about capital markets, and I'm going to get into it with just the first question to you all. Thank you for making the time for this. What's your own first answer? If you can give it a grade, or you can just say your own sense of, on a graded scale, what is your sense of, is there a crisis in capitalism? And a short observation about why you think that. And I'll start with you, Josh.
Good. Thank you, Ida, and good afternoon, everybody. I am not an economic anthropologist.
Yet.
But I have a lot of respect for the kind of work that Ida and Jillian have been doing for a long time. Capitalism, for me, still gets an A. It is the best system for the flourishing of mankind. It has done extraordinary things for the planet over the course of the last century, including bringing billions of people out of poverty, and it continues to provide the best baseline for innovation, and I would argue justice in our society. But that's theoretical capitalism. In practice, I think we are facing a crisis in different parts of our society because capitalism, as it's practiced, at least here in the US, is not working for a substantial part of our population, and we need to fix that.
Jillian?
Many people think that Adam Smith is the father of capitalism because of his book, The Wealth of Nations, which explained how competition drives growth and innovation. People forget he wrote a second book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which was basically arguing that in order to have effective competition, you had to have a climate of trust, and that involves having a sense of shared responsibility, ethical framework, respect for a shared legal framework, and a wider vision than just a balance sheet. So I would argue very strongly that what is in crisis right now is the idea that capitalism just involves an extreme neoliberal vision of the world, where it's really just about economic flows, and it's just about a company's balance sheet, and that's the only thing that matters. And that people are actually reacting to the neoliberal vision of economics today rather than capitalism in the whole. And if you go back to the original vision of Adam Smith and look at both books and put them together, you both get a vision of capitalism that is beyond the balance sheet, beyond the economic model, but you also, frankly, get a vision of capitalism that I think is more sustainable. And we don't have that today.
Thank you. Great to be here. This is really, I think, a very appropriate topic. I would agree with Josh and also Jillian on their views of capitalism, and that is that it's the best system out there, but many have been left behind. And we need to really figure out how to employ capitalism in ways that enables everybody to benefit from really what the system of capitalism can produce. If there's a concern that I have, I think at this point I'm concerned about the freedom to invest. And there's a real, I think there are issues right now. As an impact investor, we invest in vulnerable communities, we invest in the environment, we invest in things that we really care about. And I think there is kind of a trend to either discredit or make it more difficult to have that freedom to invest. So that would be one red flag that I would put out there.
Let me try to play this out, or have you all play this out a little bit, which is if we were to continue in the version of capitalism, which I'm going to say market capitalism, relatively in this space, if you're to continue on with the kinds of being left behind or the things that aren't working right now, is there a point at which the crisis in capitalism becomes a crisis in democracy? Is there a point at which the crisis in the way that the economy is working or not working for people becomes a kind of tipping point where we don't have as many options on the table for incremental change back to a place that you might describe a little bit more, Jillian? So I'm curious, if you play out without change, what might be the risks that become exacerbated to a point where we have fewer options for reform? And Jillian, maybe you start.
Can I say, because
and you can free
I think that capitalism comes in many forms.
Yeah.
You can have democratic capitalism, you can have authoritarian versions of capitalism, you can have robber baron capitalism. In my view, since 1900, there have been 4 big zeitgeist shifts in how people see the political economy. You know, until 1914, there was basically a pro-free markets, pro-globalism, pro-tech change vision of imperial capitalism. Then you had, between 1919 and 1945, essentially very ugly, protectionist, populist forms of economic management with the state heavily involved. Then post-war, World War II, you had Keynesianism, which really dominated, and that was still called capitalism, but it was a very heavy role for the state, both within America and internationally. And then you had the neoliberal revolution from the 1980s onwards, which was really about free market capitalism, which coincided with the explosion of computing power and the explosion of the financial industry and explosion of the number of financial professionals looking for flashy ways to measure free market economics using all these computing tools. So you created this vision of neoliberal economics, which was very much about the economy sitting in a place separate from politics and culture and society. You know, the only thing that mattered was what was on the balance sheet. And in some ways, one way to interpret the rise of the ESG movement 15 years ago was basically people saying there are risks beyond the balance sheet that really matter if you're running a company, whether it's environmental risk, medical risk, tech risk, social change, war. We need to look beyond the balance sheet. And if you want to be a responsible steward of capital, which is what capitalism is about, you can't just look at the numbers, you need to have a much wider lens. What I find fascinating today is we have this huge right-wing backlash against ESG, but we don't have people saying, let's go back to Milton Friedman. Instead, stakeholderism is alive and well, but what many people on the right are saying is we want different stakeholders. We want to look at national security interests. We want to look at the Main Street. And that still involves a lot of state intervention. And in many ways, there's creeping state intervention and a growing role of the state in almost every aspect of the American economy today. And that's a very different vision of capitalism from what we've had in the neoliberal order. And I suspect that is not going to change anytime soon.
So you would argue that it's already in a state of change?
Absolutely.
That is...
the zeitgeist today is radically different from where we were 15 years ago.
And I guess the question with that would be, is the state of change directionally one that is leading us to a more, and we'll get to the more hopeful or not parts of that, but is the directional place that you've just named something that brings up, that creates a growing sense of volatility and risk, or a different outcome?
Well, in my view, the question is, are we heading towards robber baron capitalism? You know, I did my PhD in the former Soviet Union. I've seen that up close. It's not pretty. You don't want that. Is it heading towards a kind of authoritarian type of capitalism? I mean, China in some ways is an authoritarian capitalist hue quite often. Or is it can America find a path towards what I think most people would want, which is a democratic form of capitalism that's truly democratic and upholds people's freedoms in every sense?
Yeah. I think Gillian's hit exactly the right point here, which is that at least here in America, I think what most people would want to have preserved is some form of democratic capitalism adjusted so that everybody feels like they're enjoying the benefits of it. I think right now, I mean, we would 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been surprised to be having a conversation at the Aspen Institute about is capitalism in crisis. But I would have been surprised to have heard that democratic capitalism is under threat. And I think the reasons for that are many. Part of them are economic, in that the populist era we are in derives in no small part from the sense of so many Americans feeling that they've been left behind, that the American dream is no longer real for their children. But it also derives from social factors that are not strictly economic. So we have kind of a stew here where democratic capitalism is under threat for both economic and because of social schisms in our society. And I think to be successful and prosperous as we need to be as a country, I think we need to address both sides of that equation.
Yeah. Jim, want to come in?
Yeah, in my view, I think democratization of capitalism is really creating the right kind of policy that would enable essentially on-ramps and guardrails for everyone to be able to participate. That has to be very thoughtful, and if done right, I think it can be a win-win. It could be a win for those that have not been able to participate, as well as those that have really benefited by capitalism, and certainly the country at large. And so, those are the kind of policies that, from my perspective, and the kind of opportunities that are going to really move the needle in terms of enabling people that have not been able to benefit from a system that has largely been concentrated in the hands of a few.
Yeah, I mean, what Jim's doing with the Aspen Institute is fantastic. I mean, they support a whole wide range of things which are totally in line with the second book of Adam Smith that everyone ignores, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is really about how do we build a thriving community, how do we actually create trust, credit in the Latin sense of the word, to actually ensure we can actually have financial markets and business actually work and make capitalism actually effective. And without paying attention to the second book, which is what you're doing, you end up with ugly robber baron capitalism that people are furious about.
Yeah. A couple of things that are surfacing here that I don't think are part of the normal conversation that we're having in this country. Jim, you wrote an article that, as I said in our prep call, and as you probably already knew, I probably forwarded to at least 100 people, saying this is important. But really, you were making the case that the real crisis in capitalism, that there's not enough capitalists. And how do you actually get people to have a stake in the upside of the economic growth? Because it seems in the country the main conversation has been between capitalism and redistribution, right? So it goes straight to a conversation about taxation. And we definitely have to have those conversations. But it's like we've skipped over an entire chapter of the conversation, which is, where is ownership going? And I'll put out there, and I'll also observe, and Josh, maybe this is where you come in, that even as there's incredible innovation and incredible investable ideas, and then there's plenty of them in the room, and we can point out the investable ideas in a broadly shared capitalist system later in this. But in other rooms that we've sat in, even these last couple of days, what's actually happening is quite the opposite. There's a concentration of capital in the owners of technology, and the ways that technology is, like, I think when we were even listening to Brené Brown, and this morning, if you listen to that, the owners of the tech of AI, you can kind of boil it down to 8 people. So we're in an extraordinary moment of concentration that's quite invisible. And what's also invisible is how to scale some of these ideas of solutions. So I'm just curious about, in those kind of gaps, how do we start to have a more robust conversation about the kinds of solutions to explore if you think about a moral economy, or if we even have those fundamental questions? And I'm going to go to Josh first, because I think you were mostly dealing with the CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, and you're having a very different conversation, or maybe it's quite aligned and we just don't know.
No, it's pretty well aligned. I know a lot of people think that I'm here representing robber baron capitalism. I'm not. That's not the way the members of the Business Roundtable think. For those of you who don't know the Business Roundtable, which is most, we're currently about 240 CEOs of a lot of America's biggest companies. It is just 240 of them, but collectively they employ 22 million people. So they are a big part of the economy. I see with us here is Suzanne Clark, who's the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They're the big dog in our field, and they represent everybody, tens of thousands of businesses. But I dare say that the members of my organization, most of whom are also members of Suzanne's, see it about the same way, that they, Jillian, they don't know it, but they've read both. They're for both of the Adam Smith books. And in 2019, the Business Roundtable took cognizance of this, and we issued a new statement on the purpose of a corporation. I'd been there for a couple of years, and my communications team tells me never to admit this, but I was unaware that the Business Roundtable had a statement on the purpose of a corporation. But we had one starting in 1997, and it was the Friedman-esque statement of the purpose of a corporation that Jillian described, which is the corporation exists to enhance value for the shareholder. And I went around to the members of the Business Roundtable. Our chair at the time was Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, but a terrific board that include a lot of companies that you'll know. And I said, does that reflect the way you run your company? And unanimously, they said no. Now, they all have a legal obligation to the shareholders of their companies. That is their legal obligation to make sure the company flourishes. But every one of them said to me that, no, when I wake up in the morning, I'm not thinking just how am I going to boost the share price today. I'm thinking about all of my stakeholders. And we, in our new statement of the corporation, purpose of a corporation, we listed the stakeholders as the customers, the employees, the suppliers, the communities in which the business operates, and the shareholders. And the whole ethos of our statement was that a good modern CEO looks out for all of those stakeholders, not just the shareholders, because if you don't serve the first four properly, you're not serving the long-term shareholder, because the enterprise will not flourish. So as you think about the big CEOs who are big employers, and by the way, they're different from many of the the hedge fund people and so on.
Yeah, we'll go there in just a second.
They don't employ many people. They are on board with a form of capitalism that recognizes that all of the stakeholders have to be in the planning of the corporation in order for the corporation to be successful for the long run.
I'm going to come to Jillian, but I want to come to you by way of a quick question for you, Jim, which is, if what you just said was true, and that all of the, I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm saying if you were to actually say that the benefit, the upside benefit of the growth and sustainability of those firms was creating outcomes that support human flourishing for each of those stakeholders, would there be a need for impact investing? Like, is there a reason you're choosing to do a different kind of investing than just into what is tradable on a stock exchange today?
Well, I think you need both. I mean, he's talking about stakeholder capitalism. And as I look at stakeholder capitalism as an investor, it really is taking into account risks that over the long term could affect the value of a company. And these involve, how it treats its employees, how it operates in the environment, the community, a lot of factors that, you can look at examples of companies that have not taken these into account, and it really has led to bad financial results for them. And I think every company can employ stakeholder capitalism. In my view, impact investing is different in that I'm investing in a company whose very business model, whose very customers and services or solution or product is addressing a problem in society. So, and I'd like to see them employ good principles of stakeholder capitalism in their business operations as well. So that's how I see that.
It's a both and for you.
That world.
Yeah.
I'd say two things. Firstly, I think most companies today do have a sense of stakeholderism. But the question is which stakeholders matter, and that has been shifting. So the first wave of stakeholderism that came out after the BRT came out with their remarkable statement was very much focused on climate issues as part of stakeholderism, human rights issues, gender rights, that kind of thing. What we're seeing today is a rise of national security interests as a form of stakeholderism that is weighing on every single company. Yeah. As you know, every single company you're dealing with has national security now as a major stakeholder issue. And, sometimes conservative Christian stakeholderist interests, it's a range of stakeholderist interests that are now out there. And 2 points I'd leave you with is that if you look as an anthropologist at the roots of the word company, do you know where the roots of the word company come from?
I read a piece you wrote years ago.
In preparation.
And it was in that piece, and I cannot remember.
Okay, well, here's two things. Well, first of all, thank you for reading at all.
Yeah.
You're having to pay my salary at the FT, so thank you. Okay, two interesting linguistic roots to note. The roots of the word company come from Old Italian con panio, which means with bread. Because the first companies were not balance sheets, they were groups of people who came together to eat and do business. Canteens matter. And the second point I'd like to make is finance. The roots of the word finance come from the old French finir, meaning to finish, which sounds really bizarre, but because historically, finance was used to settle blood debts. And when you paid money to somebody, you finished the debt. And the point is that finance was originally conceived of as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And I think one of the reasons for the current tensions around capitalism today is that most ordinary people, if you ask them, what is a company, what is finance for, they'll say companies are groups of people to do things together, and finance is there to do something else. It's like electricity, to enable other things to happen. But the cognitive dissonance today is that in reality, most people experience companies often as cold-blooded creatures that don't appear to actually put human beings first, and finance seems to be there to serve its own interests rather than the wider economy. Yeah. So to me, I think that's part of the other cultural dissonance right now.
Well, and I think I think you're giving a lot of credit to how we might parse it. I think a lot of people are sitting here at different tables, kitchen tables, a little different than these, with jobs that don't pay enough, with no hope of becoming a homeowner, with aspirations of being able to send their kids to college and not knowing how, heck, not even knowing what to tell their kids to do for a living based on the uncertainties of the future. And so the erosion that's happening to, when you say capitalism is still the best thing, a lot of people don't remember that in the beginning of how, not the beginning, I would say the post-Cold War era, what Walter Isaacson on the early days said, the big bang of institutions of right now, I would say that there was a sense then that the fight was between, in the Cold War way, was about how to organize an economy. Do you do it centrally? Do you do it more through a market base? What leads to more human expression? What leads to more creativity, dynamism, freedom? And you can't talk to a 25-year-old today and say that the counterfactual to capitalism is something that they've never experienced. They think there's got to be something better than what we have, and they have good reason to say that this is not working. So I think when we think about who our arguments are, who do we need to start to think about when we try to engage in a conversation about the future of capitalism, we have to think about some of the folks who really don't see the pathway to how they themselves get ahead. And we've got to figure out some of the ways that we re-engage in that conversation too. And I think I call it a walk and chew gum kind of theory of how we go forward. We've got to be able to have both conversations simultaneously. And I'm curious, part of me, Jim, I'll go to you. I think some of the kinds of things you're investing in are because you think, and I'll say one more thing with this. One of the, we talked about this, one of the ways that we expanded citizenship a long time ago was by decoupling it from property ownership. I'm actually curious right now if it seems like a lot of what you think about is that the way to expand a robust democracy now is by recoupling citizenship with some form of ownership. And it does seem like that's part of the ethos of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, in the National Review op-ed that I wrote a few months back on democratizing American prosperity, we really talked about 3 fundamental pillars of passive wealth building that many are not able to benefit from. And I think of my own experience, I've been able to build wealth through owning a home. I've been able to build wealth by owning a piece of the company that I've worked for, and I've been able to enjoy the benefit of a managed 401k retirement. And if we could look at those 3 areas and find the right kind of collaboration, thoughtful policy, and win-win opportunities for investors as well as those that have been left behind, I think that we can really go a long way in terms of, democratizing American prosperity. There are 3 policies that I've been really focused on right now. One that is focused on employee ownership through ESOPs and a zero-cost subsidy. It's the American Ownership and Resilience Act that is starting to gain momentum. Lafayette Square has really been behind that, and it would create a zero-cost subsidy to really help investors invest in for owners that want to sell their businesses and would sell to employees but don't have a liquidity option there to provide that liquidity. And so you're making stronger businesses at the same time you're building wealth in employees, you're making stronger communities, and really a more secure nation because many of these companies could either fold or be acquired by foreign interests. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is relative to home ownership and affordability of homes. The Investing in Housing Affordability Act is another one that Lafayette Square has stood up, and I've been very much involved in pilots across the country where we're taking and essentially monetizing home price appreciation to enable prospective home buyers to sell a portion of the appreciating equity in the home to come up with the down payment that they need to have a conforming mortgage that Freddie and Fannie would take out to fill that gap. And in Colorado, if they were able to do that at 80% of AMI at about a 20% shared appreciation loan, you'd be able to, in every county, be able to have affordable home and really economic financial security because the mortgage cost is much less, and you have financial freedom in terms of the savings that you're not putting into a mortgage that you can put to health care, child care, and so many other things. The final piece of legislation is the Retirement Savings Act, or Savings for Americans Act, which really utilizes the federal thrift savings plan as a model for the 40% of Americans. These are gig workers, these are those that don't have opportunity to participate in a retirement plan to be able to have a 401k type managed retirement plan with auto enrollment, with investment options, portability, and matching on the low income side. And if you look at all of those, you can really change the landscape if we can focus on bringing people on board and creating the right kind of environment for investors to invest, and I think appropriate guardrails so that these don't really lead to where bad things can happen to the more vulnerable populations.
Yeah, I would say things. I'll let you jump into this. I'll just say that whether the outcome of an election that just happened nationally or one that just happened in New York City, either way, people are looking for having a stake, some kind of a solution. And
well, I was going to say, basically, if you tie together what Jim's saying, it's about having skin in the game.
Yeah.
And to create that sense of shared interest in a capitalist system, you need to find a way to have skin in the game. Otherwise, it's feudalism. And if you look at what came out of New York in the last 48 hours, You know, there's a whole coterie of young people today who don't feel they have any skin in the game, who don't think the pie is growing. Post-World War II, the idea was the pie was growing so fast that everyone could get a piece of it. There's now a perception the pie is fixed. And if you don't have skin in the game, of course they are very angry and disillusioned.
What are you going to bring back to the Business Roundtable about a conversation like this, Josh?
Well, I'll bring one copy of Adam Smith's first book and a copy of his second book. Can I?
And which one's more important?
They are equally important.
We're going to have a debate next year on.
Which is exactly the point of our statement on corporate purpose, which is that if you do not take care of the stakeholder side of your responsibilities, you are not taking care of the shareholders. Yeah. And Ida, you were contrasting impact investing with other corporate behavior, and they are not the same. They are, however, additive. And I think the impact investing that Jim is talking about is great. That is not what the CEOs of the Business Roundtable do. Their principal job is to make sure that their company flourishes, and they also recognize that the company will not flourish if they are not taking proper care of all of the stakeholders. Can I ask a question to the audience?
Well, we're going to go to the audience just next. So
well, all right.
Plant the seed on us. No, we'll plant the seed now, and we'll hear both questions and answers in just a few minutes. Go ahead.
Well, actually, this was not an opinion question.
So let's just let it rip. Go for it.
Yeah. How many folks went to see Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford's presentation just now? Okay, yeah. So these are the folks who were worried about the direction of capitalism, and Jim Farley of Ford is really worried about it because his company and his employees, which used to be the American dream, are now very much at risk. And so taking us to some of the solutions, I thought Jim put out, he postulated the essential economy, which he described as people who do everything. They move things, they service things, and they repair things. And it's a huge part of the economy. And he said the essential economy is struggling, and we need to do 4 things, all of which I think we ought to put on the table and which I will take back to the Business Roundtable. First one is permitting reform. And I don't need to take that one back to the Business Roundtable because every single member of the Business Roundtable says their business is substantially impeded by our government policies on permitting that make it impossible to build stuff in America. The second thing he said is we need to rewire how we're doing training. And that one will resonate a lot with our membership, Suzanne, your membership, because they are all working very hard to establish apprenticeship programs and collaborations with community colleges and so on.
Let's get the third and fourth out pretty quickly.
Right, third and fourth. Third and fourth. Anybody who was there remember the?
Right. There's the third and the fourth. We'll get back to you.
The
Never
most
do more
important
than 3. Lists should only have 3.
Most important one was change the culture, I thought. And, it's trained for 2050, not 1950. Very good. And the fourth was change the culture. Because we do need a cultural shift in this country so that we are valuing the people who do jobs like that will not, at least anytime in the near future, be taken over by robots or AI.
We're going to end with a lightning round. So I'm going to give you the question now. We're going to go to the room, which is just when you do think about a conversation, which you'll probably have before you leave this campus or even in the next hot dog line, but with a 25-year-old who says, give me a reason to be hopeful, give me a reason to fight for capitalism. What's going to be something you can say to them or something that they should read? So think about that suggestion. But I would love to hear questions from the group, and we're going to wait for a microphone. So I saw somebody here raise their hand. I'm going to go ahead and take 2 or 3, and then so that's going to mean you're going to run, but then you get to rest. It's interval training for the mic runners. So green shirt, and then orange shirt, and then black shirt, and then we'll take them on. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Number 9.
Well, I'm a 27-year-old looking for a reason to hope about capitalism. Jillian, you referenced the story of the neoliberal era, which in my mind is kind of like pioneered by Reagan and cemented by Clinton. I think of it as a bunch of decisions, policy decisions, anti-work, right-to-work laws, globalization choices. What I see missing, and the thing I want to hope for, is a new project. I think of the neoliberal era as a project of all these decisions, and I hear that there is a new shareholder, there's a new idea, there's a new, I don't know what you called it, a statement that came out by the Business Roundtable. What I feel is missing, and I don't think Trump or Bernie capture it the way I hope for, is a project, and I'm curious what you're hearing as a project that encompasses, well, what should we do differently about globalization, about labor, about financial regulation, all these different things. It's a question to all of you, but I'm curious mostly what you think and what you're hearing from CEOs.
Okay. Orange shirt. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was about to observe that there was no mention of AI on this panel the entire time until you mentioned it in your last sentence. And I realize that AI can create all sorts of efficiencies and new types of jobs and could be very good for the economy and in positive ways, but it's also possible that the elimination of tens of millions of jobs by AI may go much faster than the creation of new jobs. And I'm wondering what, once again, you're all thinking about that, and the related piece of that is when people talk about universal basic income, UBI, are there versions of that that one could imagine, for example, the CEOs who are part of Business Roundtable beginning to support as this rapid AI transition happens?
Okay, this is great. And 2 different generational eras and questions, and now we're going to have some gender diversity in our questions. So go ahead and add one to the mix.
Thank you very much to the panel. I am sure you heard about 15 years ago Nick Stern saying that climate change was the biggest failure of the market. I like to add to that climate changes are the biggest failure of our imagination. So when we imagine a new capitalism, how does it look like for you members of the panel, a capitalism that does not do the trade-off of destroying our planet?
So I heard questions about both some of the social externalities of the capitalism issues and a change of technology and of climate, and then a fundamental question about not just the work, but the project of the future. Who would like to start? And I'll give you about 2 minutes each if you want to answer any one of those questions or some montage. Josh?
Let me take the AI question first. I think that is likely to be the challenge of our time. A lot of our CEOs like to talk about the promise of AI, which indeed is very promising, that they're not talking about it replacing any of their employees, they're talking about it making their employees better. But that means they have to be AI literate, and they have to know how to use it. And interesting research out recently suggests that just blindly using AI actually probably makes you less intelligent rather than more. So that will be a huge challenge. As to the project, it's too big of a question to answer, and Ida won't let me even if I tried.
You know me so well already.
Yeah. But I would say our joint project, and I take it to be the Aspen Institute's project, is to bring together all of the communities of corporates and academia and civil society and everybody together, because the kinds of challenges we're facing now will not be solved simply by letting the market work. I'm a big free market advocate, but those challenges won't be met by mere free market economics, which tends to default, as Jillian described, to what's on the balance sheet. But the reason for optimism is that I see many leaders in my organization, in the business community, but also I see many leaders of your age who are who are having breakthrough ideas that I think our society is still flexible enough to adopt.
Well, if you want a reason for optimism, I'd give you two. One is that we live in an era where people have an once unimaginable level of personal expression and many personal freedoms too. And I say that because also I lived in the former Soviet Union. I see what it's like to live under a state-controlled so-called socialist system. And if you've experienced it at first hand, which most of the angry young millennials and Gen Zers haven't, then you start to appreciate what extraordinary benefits there are in today's world. But more importantly, well, the other thing I was going to say is I think we are living at a moment of epistemological flux, which is greater than any of us have seen in our lifetimes. Because most of us have grown up in an era where the neoliberal ideas were dominant, and we took them for granted. That's shaped our worldview. We're all creatures of our own environment in every sense. And we lived in a world where it seemed as if the West was triumphant, particularly after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And today, the post-World War II order is dead and buried. It's over. We don't know where we're going. The neoliberal vision is under increased attack and stress. And you have at least three factors which are creating a moment of extraordinary flux. We're seeing the rise of industrial policy again on a scale we've not seen for 50 years. Not since Keynesianism. We're seeing a retreat from globalization to localization and national interests. And we're also seeing the explosion of tech, which is not just creating the dynamic that companies actually, how companies are created. It means that a lot of exchanges in the world today are not mediated by money. They're actually swaps of services for data. And that changes how we imagine capitalism as well. And you put those three things together, and I don't know where it's going, but I do think we're on the verge of a really interesting shift, which can be really exciting if people are willing to get involved in it and actually try to remake capitalism for the 21st century more effectively.
Well, Jim, I'm going to say that we already answered I'm going to say 27 is as good as 25, so we won't come back for the final. So go ahead and offer your own 2 cents to the crowd, and we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Well, I reflect on something my dad said to me, and I'm an optimist. He was an optimist, and he would tell me that the best is yet to come. And I also remember him 30 years ago saying, I wish I was my son, because I'm at an age where, I can't be part of really what you're going to be part of in the future. And what I've seen over the last 30 years, I think has been wondrous in many ways. It's also been terrifying in other ways. And I look at the next generation. I look at my own children and the students at the Institute, and that's where I find my optimism. I believe that the best is yet to come, that we're going to figure this out. I feel like we have to constantly be looking at ways to include people and essentially, make sure that we have strong principles that guide us and competent, leaders in all levels of government with character and principle. And I think if we can focus on that, the best is yet to come.
I want to thank the panel, and I hope you felt like we were in a great conversation together with all of you. Thank you. And I especially want to thank it because it is true, Josh, that this is what we're taking on at Aspen. This is the conversation. It can't just be economists or business folks. It's going to be a broad and growing theme for us to talk about the economy and society. So thank you all. Enjoy.